And I'm going to kick this off with just a couple of stats. There's so many things I could say about this, but something that stood out to me in the research was the National Housing Federation says that there are 8.5 million people in the UK with some kind of unmet housing need. That includes 2 million children. And this might be anything from overcrowding situations, too many people for too few bedrooms, to homelessness. So, but 8.5 million, that's a shockingly high number. And in the 1970s, the government spent 95% of its housing budget on building or improving housing. And now it only spends 12%, with the vast majority of the rest on housing benefit. So we are very much in a backward situation when it comes to investing in our public wealth. So I'm so excited to have these two people here on the panel. So we have Sam Cadell from Acorn, and we have Simon Ripton, Derbyshire councillor. I'm going to let each of them in turn speak for about 5 minutes to introduce themselves and just sort of frame housing in their various areas. Start with Sam, is that okay? Brilliant, thank you. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you. So I'm Sam. I'm the Acorn Bristol head organiser. Acorn is a community union for low to moderate income people. We're known as a campaigning organisation on housing, but as a community union, we take action on anything that materially impacts our members. For low-income people, housing is often the thing that has the most concrete and negative impact on our lives. Our members are living in cold, damp homes, in and out of hospital with respiratory problems. They're living in tower blocks that are crumbling and at risk of imminent structural collapse. There are several blocks in Bristol where that's the case, and that's the same all around the country. Our members are living in private housing that's getting increasingly unaffordable. Members having to move cities. From Bristol example, people are moving to Newport because they simply can't afford to rent here anymore. And many, many members are on an increasingly long waiting list for social housing. What we do about that is that we build an organisation that's led and powered by our members. Members vote locally on what they want to campaign on and what actions they want to take on it. We focus on direct action, confronting those in power, forcing them to make changes that positively impact our members. So some examples locally of campaigns we've won include a couple of years ago, there was a fire, Bristolians might remember, in Twinnell House in East Bristol that led to the death of one of the residents. In the aftermath of the fire, residents in tower blocks all around Bristol were reporting that they felt that they were at similar risk, that the fire safety measures in their tower blocks were just not adequate. So we started a campaign that our members in East Bristol took the lead on initially, but then we expanded it out to tower blocks all around the city and made some demands around fire safety, including the installation of sprinklers, the installation of communal fire alarms, removal of cladding. And we won the campaign, and the investment that went in as a result to our tower blocks is just above £96 million in Bristol. Every tower block in Bristol will have sprinklers. Dangerous cladding has been removed. It's in the process of being removed from the blocks as well. In terms of private renting, an example of a successful campaign is around private rental bidding. So as a private renter currently, if you express interest in an advert, then often, because there's such a demand for every private rental that goes up, the letting agent or landlord will say, oh, listen, we've got 5 people who are interested. How much could you pay? So then the price goes up, through bidding. We did a campaign locally on this, getting letting agents to sign up to a pledge that they would no longer encourage private rental bidding. And we got 30 estate agents, including the biggest one, CJ Hole, to sign up to that publicly. And we've done mystery shopping since. They're actually advertising this as an example of their ethical business practices as a result of that. And we've pushed for it to be included in the Renters' Rights Bill, and it will be outlawed, private rental bidding, as a result of being included in the Renters' Reform Bill. Renters' Rights Bill, whenever that becomes law. I think that's probably enough from me for now. I'll move on to...
Fantastic, yeah, thanks, Sam. And just put all my cards on the table. I am an Acorn member in Islington, a fantastic group. Also really enjoyed a campaign you did against Barclays Bank to stop, they were limiting the term of buy-to-let mortgages, which put a lot of insecurity on people's rental contracts. And that was amazing to see them all camped out in bank. Bess, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we mobilised members all around the country and occupied 30 branches of the bank on one day. And yeah, this was on a Saturday. By the Monday in Brighton, they'd started up this kind of street stall outside the bank, and we got all of these frantic phone calls and emails from negotiators at the bank saying, one of the emails, it was an empty email just with the subject line, "You're holding a gun to our head." We got the policy change.
I love that they caved immediately. It's brilliant. Great. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks, thanks, Sheridan. Yeah, so I'm Simon Ripton. I wear a couple of hats. My day job for my sins is in financial services, so I feel I should apologise for that. I guess, though, that I've spent 30 years on the mortgage side, pension side, wealth side, so I have some interesting perspectives, and well done, by the way. I probably want to spend the next 30 years tearing it all down, but that's a conversation for another day. In addition, though, I'm also a district councillor in Derbyshire Dales, elected 2.5 years ago on a Labour ticket. I feel I should apologise for that as well at the moment. I am definitely on the left of the party. Enough said about that for now, I think. So I was elected 2.5 years ago, specifically on a mandate to deal with social housing in Derbyshire Dales. And for those of you who don't know Derbyshire Dales, if you can picture the country with sort of Manchester, Sheffield and Derby, it's the kind of triangular bit in the middle there. And if you drive through Derbyshire Dales, I mean, it's very pretty. There's some spectacular housing there. But if you kind of peel beneath the surface, it's actually a place with some real challenges, because I think we have the second biggest gap between incomes and household prices in the country. And the reason for that is because lots and lots of rich, old, retired people love to go and retire there, in particular in the Peak District where I live, so that elevates the price of housing. And the economy there is generally a low-income, low sort of productivity economy. So we're talking tourism, we're talking farming, and we're talking sort of extractive industry, so very low wages. So that creates some real problems. We have hundreds of families who are in housing need, and certainly, I mean, I've spent the last 2 years now trying to change that, and my job today is to try and bring alive some of the challenges with that. It's made more complicated by being in the Peak District National Park. So again, Derbyshire Dales is kind of half Derbyshire Dales, where the council is the planning authority. The other bit is the Peak District National Park. And as you can imagine, they have different agenda in terms of housing and economic development and the environment. So it makes it very, very difficult to get things done.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to dive into the questions then. So one sort of big area, so the policies like rent controls, ending right to buy, they're top of mind for many on the left to solve the renters' crisis. However, they'll likely have a huge impact on house prices and could put off the homeowner voting bloc, some of whom, for better or worse, see this as their pension support. So how can we overcome this? Do you see the MMT lens helping here at all? But like, how would you address this kind of like, dichotomy?
I mean, to some extent, we might have to just say, fuck them. I think also in my experience, though, people are not as cruelly self-interested if we're talking about small landlords. My mum, for example, her pension is renting out one flat. But I think she and many other small landlords like her would be willing to accept the value of their assets going down if it was presented alongside a broad sweep of changes across the country that would improve dignity of life for everybody. So I think we should think about the homeowner block, but also understand that they have many different interests beyond just the value of their assets, and we can appeal to those.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years is that the district council effectively has 4 jobs to do to make anything happen in social housing. The first is to assess need, and to be fair, it's pretty good at that. You know, they put surveys out, they engage with the community. So identifying the need, you know, is good. Then they've got to find sites. And that's impossible because most of the land is in private hands, and frankly, you know, they don't want to sell it. Or if they do, they want prices that are possibly not realistic or that make the build uneconomic. So I think at some point we have to have a grown-up conversation about the ownership of the land, and obviously you can only have that conversation if you have an understanding of the power of the public purse and the ability of the public purse to acquire that land and do what needs to be done.
Absolutely. Did you want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. One of the sort of policy solutions that Acorn is putting forward on a national level is to make it easier for local authorities to buy private land. I'd also say that there's something that needs to be done around empowering local authorities in their relationships with private developers as well, because it's not just a problem of local authorities acquiring land, but also losing land way beyond the value of it because they feel the pressure of building any type of housing. So then, maybe not everyone has as much of an understanding, but I guess some people will know about the process where local authority will invite a developer to build some housing. The developer will come back with a proposal that includes usually the minimum target, or it's not a minimum target, it's a target for how much social housing will be included. In Bristol, it's 20%. At that point, the council says, great, you've met our target for social housing, let's go ahead with this. The developer will then often sit on the land for a number of years so that it accumulates in value. And then they'll put in a viability report. So they'll hire a company to say, how economically viable is it for us to actually provide this quantity of social housing that we said we wanted to provide? And invariably, the viability report comes back and says, well, building costs are getting more expensive. The land has got more valuable since then. You're actually not going to be able to get your 20% profit from this if you build 20% affordable housing as part of it. And so they'll come back to the council with this report saying, well, actually, we can do 3% maybe. And if the council wants to challenge this, they have very little leverage in that relationship. And very often in Bristol, although we have an administration that I believe really wants to create as much affordable housing as possible, they have so little leverage in these relationships that they often accept deals far below the 20% target that they've set themselves. So I think on a national level, we also need to give stronger, I think it's about regulating the developers. Acorn nationally is saying we need not just a 20% target, but a 20% minimum standard. And that affordable should mean social rent level, not just some vague whatever affordable might be calculated. But national government needs to step up and give teeth to local authorities in those negotiations, because currently they're letting the developers get away with whatever they want, basically.
Absolutely.
Sam makes a really good point, and I think if I think about the thing I've had to work hardest on in the last 2 years, it's actually culture change in the organisation. And the reason for that is, as I said earlier, the district council has 4 things to do. 1, housing needs assessments. 2, find land. The 3rd, as Sam describes, work with these registered providers, housing associations. And then at the end, they may or may not be tipping in pots of money, funding to make these developments work. But the problem is, as Sam says, this stuff just doesn't happen at scale. It doesn't happen with any pace. And the council I inherited, and bearing in mind it was a Conservative council, I think for 25 years plus, the council we inherited had worked out that it was never going to get anything done. So effectively, it would pick off the odd dwelling here or there, put a little bit of funding in here or there to sort of add a social home to the housing stock. But whilst that was happening, the need was going up and up and up and up and up. And they were patting themselves on the back, sort of saying, this is great, we've added another dwelling. And then you look at the KPI, which is unhoused people, and you go, this makes no sense. And the resource profile of the organization made no sense because they had almost no people on this topic, which was how do we help people who are in desperate need of social housing get a home? So we've had to spend 2 years effectively changing the mindset. And I'm not being critical, by the way, of the staff there because they work incredibly hard under some really challenging financial conditions. But changing the mindset around this is something we can do. We need to shift resources into this. We need to bring in skills, capability, resources into the organization and start to match the level of ambition to the problem that is a growing problem every single day.
Yeah, just a very quick anecdote on that thing of staff members trying to find people homes in the council. I was talking to a housing officer who works for the council locally, and they were saying, I'm actually kind of depressed. I came into this job because I thought being a housing officer was trying to find people housing, and actually I realized that my job is telling people that we don't have any.
Terrific. Well, I want to lead into that actually with Simon then, just sort of like from your private finance background, like what do you see as the ideal situation? Like what role should private finance be playing in the housing sector, if anything, in your opinion? And then I'll have Sam come in on that afterwards.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess I would turn the whole thing on its head. And we've said it previously over the last 24 hours, if you start from the perspective that there are lots and lots of people whose housing needs will be best met by a socially accountable, democratically accountable landlord who can provide safe, secure housing, maintain it properly, and do all that at an affordable price. That probably leads you to the government, the state. Beyond that, if people want to buy private housing, if there is a role for private builders, mortgage companies, fine, okay. But we've got to start from the perspective of what resources are required to meet that core need, and then work out what do we do with the residual. In my day job, I do come across pension funds in particular. There's a wall of money in the pensions industry that is now focused very squarely on residential housing. And you look at the ownership of those pension assets. Defined contribution pensions now we've shifted away from the old defined benefit schemes. Generally, the bulk of those assets are owned by rich people. So you've got a concentration now of sort of rich people's money being focused on providing bog standard residential housing, and that worries me. What worries me. Housing associations is another example. A lot of these housing associations started out as relatively small, locally focused organizations. Now they're massive financial organizations, and there's no accountability at all. I get lots and lots of stuff in my inbox. People saying, they're not doing this, and they're not doing that. Can you hold them to account? And the reality is, at a district council level, we have absolutely no power to hold them to account. What we can do is try and influence them. We do try and get meetings with them. We have been successful, actually, and put, I guess, social pressure on them. Say, is this the right thing to do? And maybe publicise some of the wins we have and some of the resources that are available to help people. But yeah, the rising cost of interest has effectively meant it's harder for these housing associations to service their debt. So what have they done? Turn down maintenance. It's not right.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with everything Simon said there. I don't think we can trust developers to cut themselves out of a tidy profit. That's their MO. So yeah, I think the state should be building public housing. That's the only solution. I think on the way to that, there's probably some things that need to be done around what demands we make of the state in regulating private developers, because they're not going to disappear overnight. And then also to pave the way for a mass public housing building project, we need to look at right to buy as well. We're speaking to local authorities who see public house building as a waste of money because of the discounts that are currently applied to right to buy. It's just throwing money away that's going to end up in private hands. So those discounts for Acorn need to be gotten rid of, because otherwise we're never going to see a public housing program across the whole country.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess related to this, so Labour has a strategy to build a lot more housing. They want to add a bunch to the stock. Do you think this is going to help? And how should we be considering environmental issues as part of this? Because these plans will put us over our carbon budgets. So do we need to be thinking about this differently? Should we be thinking about addressing under-occupation or getting empty homes back, or the right to buy back, where we're getting more getting those homes back basically that were sold during right to buy? Start with Sam.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're working on in local campaigns is taxation of empty homes. In Liverpool and Leeds, we've managed to get a second home tax, and in Leeds it was a tax of 300%, so it's quite substantial. Obviously, that really decreases the attractiveness of having empty homes, and also if they're there, it puts money into the public purse. I think that's something that we should continue pushing across the whole country. I think, yeah, again, we need to be shifting the narrative around the red tape stuff, because developers can't be trusted. We know that. And I think it needs to be regulation around how much social homes are being provided. I think climate should definitely be a consideration in there as well. Developers are not going to think about this unless we force them to. And to be honest, government won't be thinking about this unless we force them to either. So it's our job to force them.
Yeah, I mean, the 1.5 million homes thing is a great headline, isn't it? But I think it's a lot more complicated than that, for a couple of reasons. I think I know there are lots of people, for example, who would like to move or would like to go from one size of house to a different size of house, but it's almost impossible within that kind of social housing setting. So that in itself is problematic. I think if there was more thought going into transportation and how people move between areas, that would help, because a lot of people are sort of stuck in one place, need to work somewhere else. So actually, is it a housing issue or is it a transport issue? And I think from a mile high, the 1.5 million homes thing, I mean, to me, it just looks like, we're reaching straight for the sort of private developers and straight for the rip-up, the sort of regulations agenda, rather than actually think about, to my earlier point, how do we deal with those people who need social housing at an affordable price first, and how do we move the stock of housing around, repurpose buildings, get people in the right places, which is the hard stuff. Let's be honest, it's easy to say we'll build 1.5 million homes, but that's the hard stuff that needs to be done. But as we know, financially, that's not the challenge. It's the hard work that's got to be done.
Yeah, I was having a conversation over lunch about Knoll West in Bristol. It's in the south of Bristol. The edge of Knoll West goes on to fields, more or less. And it was a council estate that was built with sort of lofty ambitions. And over time, it's got to the point where pretty much every community centre has been closed. The bus routes are declining in frequency and accessibility every month, it seems like. And there's huge anger that's building in this area about being left out, being left behind. And if you look at the polling from the recent WECA elections, if people voted for the same party in local elections, Knoll West would go reform. And we should be really worried about that. And so I think it's really helpful, Simon, to raise this issue of housing being not just about individual homes, but about the communities that you're building, and whether those communities will lead people to have like a dignified life, right? So it's about community centres, it's about local doctors' surgeries, it's about transport, as well as it's about the homes themselves.
Absolutely. You preempted my next question as well, which was about, do we need to be creating different kinds of housing for aging populations, reducing loneliness, that kind of thing? I think like in some countries, there are quite inspiring projects, like in Denmark, with like co-living situations where you have your private space, but then maybe it's kind of small, and then you have like larger co-living areas, like common spaces. Do you see any inspiration from other types of housing that we should be building here?
I think absolutely yes. And again, back to the 1.5 million homes. People are so fixated. The people involved with the delivery of that are so fixated on the numbers. And I think what I'm seeing is at a sort of national policy planning framework level and at a local plan level, the argument is all about numbers, numbers, numbers. Where are we going to put the numbers? Not how do we build sustainable communities? How do we make sure that these are places that people want to live, they're eco-friendly, that the jobs are there? That conversation is not happening. It's simply about how do we shoehorn numbers into finite spaces.
Yeah, a local example of this was our members had to fight quite hard recently because the previous administration was looking into each tower block, or in fact like low-rise block. Generally, it's built with a community room downstairs, and they're like run down, but it is a community space that you can book out for birthday parties, celebrations of other kinds. And just looking at the numbers, the administration was like, oh, we've got space to build maybe 1 or 2 extra apartments in each of these blocks all around the city. We had to fight to stop them from doing this and to put pressure on and show that these were like really valued spaces. They made like very like poor quality housing in terms of investment over the years a little bit livable, because there was somewhere that you could meet up with your neighbors, or you could, we had to fight quite hard for that. And I think that's a result of decision makers being several steps away from actually the residents who are living there and understanding what life is like in those blocks. On a numbers basis, you could understand them looking at it being like, oh, that's wasted space, but you've only got to speak to residents to know that it makes living in that block like at least a little livable, even if you're scared of the block collapsing, even if you've got damp and mold that the council's never got around to repairing, you've got the community room something, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I want to turn over to the audience now. Is there someone who can help me mic run? Yes, I see Kieran. Let me get you a mic. All right, so we have someone at the back on the left, and then here on the left as well. Take 3 questions.
Okay. Do you think nationalisation of land with an MMT hat on is either desirable or possible?
You mentioned part of the problem is developers sitting on land. Do you see a role of some kind of land tax to catalyse release of it?
Grab the person at the back. Oh, and then we'll take Suzanne as well, and in front.
Hi, I have a question about home ownership as a financial asset, and you've touched on this, but I would like you to expand on that, because in my experience, I have relatively many conversations with friends who are like, we need to increase home ownership of low-income households to increase their wealth. And intuitively, I'm always like, I don't think that's true, but I'm never entirely sure of what to say. So my question is, how would you respond to someone who says we need to increase home ownership among low-income households to increase their wealth?
Yeah, so Kieran, the person at the back, I think I let them, over there.
Hi there. I think also culturally we've got this obsession of viewing housing as an appreciating asset at all times, when in fact it should be a depreciating one. It wears out, right? During the pandemic, as an example, we saw used cars value rise quite significantly, and the response to that was to work on the supply issues, not actually to limit the amount of available loans to actually buy them. With housing, we seem to approach this differently. And I suppose the fact is, when we know we've got enough housing, we'll see the depreciation, I think. So it's fundamentally, as I see it, a supply issue that we need to correct pretty damn quickly.
Okay, Simon, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so I think the first 2 questions broadly relate to, at some point, we have to have a grown-up conversation about the ownership of land in this country, period, okay? And we know that from an MMT perspective, it is all about real resources. Well, if the real resources we need to do the things that need to be done are not in the right hands, we need to use the power of democracy and democracy's link to public money to change that. So that absolutely has to happen. I think the second or the third question about home ownership as a source of wealth, which I think again relates to the final question, the financialization of assets. Again, if we look through an MMT lens, if we had job guarantee and we had higher wages as a result of that, and we had the state as an active participant in the economy, hiring people to do good, well-paid work, and we had social security, and we had retirement pensions, that would fundamentally change people's needs to accumulate wealth in the way that perhaps they think about accumulating wealth today, which would then take pressure off the finite housing stock and the land that we have.
Yeah, starting with the last question, because I think that was a helpful answer. I think I'd, agree with that. I think I'd add to that, though, that there are complexities in the here and now. It's not an easy, I don't think there's an easy answer to that, personally. I think currently, in fact, this isn't what I think, it's an Acorn position that it should be easier for first-time buyers to get a mortgage. So many of our members are trapped in increasingly expensive and unsafe private renting, and one solution to that is to buy your first home. Currently, mortgage terms are far more favorable to people who are doing buy-to-let than they are for first-time buyers, and that needs to change, in our view. Yeah, it's about homes, not assets, and I think we should be pushing lenders to change their policies on that. And we've in the States, I don't know if anyone knows, but Acorn was started in 1970 in the US. We're relatively new in this country. We were started in Bristol in 2014, but in the States, they were very active from the 70s through to sort of early 2000s, and they got to 500,000 members, and they were able to push banks to change their terms around mortgages to be more favorable to first-time buyers. So this is achievable. So I think there's, in the short term, a role for that. It is something we should be pushing for. I think, in the perfect world that we're moving towards, maybe that's a different question. But for now, I think actually first-time buyers should be finding it easier to buy their home.
Can I follow up on that? Do you, excuse me, do you think we need something in, obviously we don't really have a codified constitution or anything like that, but almost something like a right to housing to make it so that people, I can see right now how people would want to prioritize owning their own because that's truly what they have control over. And with the social housing, you have, no idea whether you're going to be have the rug pulled out under you at some point. Would something like a right to housing help that?
I'm personally in favour of that. I think Andy Burnham is on record in Manchester as saying that his view is that people in Manchester should absolutely have a right to a safe and affordable social home. So I think absolutely, we need to bake these things in, from day one.
I agree. I don't have much more to say on that. But coming back to the other questions, because I realised I didn't answer those. The first two, yes and yes. But I think, maybe this question about supply is an interesting one to come back to in the context of that. There's enough homes for everybody. So I think, we should be looking to address that. There shouldn't be empty homes and people living on the street. It's an ambitious problem to solve, but I think that should be our horizon.
I'm going to jump in as chair as one thing I did want to ask that I forgot to ask was, what do you see the role of community wealth building and community land trusts in all of this? Sam, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I think I like the idea of community land trusts a great deal. I don't see them as there's not the opportunity now for them to be an effective tactic to put resources in. Land and housing is so expensive that you need to have huge wealth to be able to buy up stuff. In Bristol, there's maybe 5 co-ops, like housing co-ops, and they were either founded in the 90s when housing was a lot cheaper, or they've been bought by pretty wealthy people and then given as a sort of charitable thing to co-ops. We can't do that at scale. There have been other times and places where there have been opportunities where the values of houses have been low enough that the community can kind of buy them up, but we're not in that position in Bristol, and I don't think we are in other cities, like maybe places like Liverpool, but I doubt it. I think for us at Acorn, our biggest asset is our power. As an organisation of low to moderate income people, we've got strength in numbers. For elected politicians, we can threaten their seats. We can threaten the profits of private companies. So I think there's a huge need for us to be base building, to build organisations that are run by the membership, and to build those as quickly as we can at scale. I think we're in a moment of like some excitement around electoral politics, because we're seeing more left-wing voices get bolder. But I think it's easy to get carried away with that. And personally, I don't think any of the left-wing options have the base they need to actually push through their most ambitious campaigns. I think they're going to get, personally, I think they get nuked before they even get to elections. But once they're in, capital will come down on them like a ton of bricks. We need a base underneath that to be able to realize any of the policy changes that we've been talking about. So yeah, I think we're talking about building community wealth. I think we should be thinking about power.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on that, so I am a fan of community land trusts. A friend of mine runs one in the next village. It's been very successful, but I think they've grown up in response to the kind of democratic deficit that exists in housing today. And to my earlier point, you know, if we actually had properly funded local councils who could deliver on the social housing needs and connect people to the planning process, you know, the design of those communities, actually you wouldn't need CLTs because we would have a democratic and adequately funded solution. Just on that, and I don't know how many of you know about the local government review or reorganisation that is currently happening. That worries me. I mean, I'm extraordinarily worried about that because I see that as separating local councillors from their communities, because we're going to have many fewer councillors sort of per head of population. That is a problem. I also see it as an opportunity for the government to sell off public buildings, valuable, probably iconic buildings in some locations, which for all intents and purposes could or should be used for social purposes, including housing. I suspect they will simply be sold to private or into private hands. So extraordinarily worried about LGR.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good flag. Gabby, is anyone online? Yeah. Kieran, can we get a mic to Gabby? Oh, actually, no.
Yeah.
You got the question.
Well, someone emailed from an online question from Debbie. Okay. Why can't we convert empty inner city retail buildings into homes for people?
I'll take a few more from the floor if we have any. Here, up at the front. And the one by you as well, Kieran, yeah.
Yeah, I was curious about Acorn being opposed to discounts for right to buy, if I understood correctly. If we are in a society where we accept that, you know, owning a property is like a key to unlocking social mobility, I'm curious about why you take that stand. Like, it seems that if councils can't reinvest that money back into building new housing stock, that's a problem, but why are you against it full stop?
Yeah, I appreciate that you've been talking about kind of doing things at ground level, but we've talked a lot about the prices and the value of both land and property. And it occurs to me that actually through the sort of MMT lens, actually, we know that one of the reasons that the housing market is so has heated up over the last 30 or 40 years is to do with the banks, and the banks kind of pursuing easy loans because they know that it can repossess the house if the loans are defaulted on. And it just occurs to me that that everything we're talking about here is trying to get round the fact that the value of property and land is so ridiculously high and inaccessible for people. And surely that's the sort of source of the problem. And I just wondered what your views are on that. I appreciate that you might say, well, there's nothing I can do about that. What I'm doing is on the ground. But surely the idea is that it makes sense to sort of address the actual source of the issue, which is the inflated nature of house value and land value, to do with the way the banks operate.
Over to you.
So yeah, on that last point, we've not talked about rent controls at all.
We mentioned it briefly, but yeah, we could have done that a bit more.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's one of the great arguments for rent controls. Yeah, the critics of rent controls will come back and say, oh, but you know, house prices will go down, etc. But that's a good thing. That's what we want. So yeah, that's my answer there. On right to buy discounts, the reason that we've taken this as a position is because we will not see a mass public housing building program without getting rid of right to buy discounts. If local councils build a lot of public housing, if the discounts are in place, they will lose all of that investment within a number of years. And so local councils just won't do it. They'll put their money elsewhere. So yeah, it's a necessary part of a bigger program. And then, yeah, on converting empty retail and commercial properties into housing, theoretically, it's a great idea. In practice, it can be really disastrous. There's the example of Imperial Apartments in South Bristol. That was a sort of office park that was transformed into housing by a private developer, Carradine. And the conditions there are absolutely appalling. There's like blood stains on the corridor walls, all the lights in the corridors are flashing constantly. Like I've tried to go out there door knocking multiple times and it's the bleakest place I've been to go and speak to people door to door. And then of course there's all of the sort of disrepair issues that you'd expect with that level of neglect inside the homes themselves. So like theoretically, with enough investment, they could have built some very nice flats there, but in practice, the developer was just looking to get as much profit as they could, and they did that. We're campaigning on trying to get strong arm the developer into doing some more investment in repairs there, and part of that is about pressuring the council to actually hold them to account, because some of it is rented by the council. But it's been a disaster for the people living there. It's been, yeah, horrendous.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, the thing that binds all those three questions together is the profit motive. You know, if you only do what is profitable, that's the outcomes you get. I think what I've observed in the district council where I am is that it is effectively stripped of any capacity to do anything strategic or long term. And what I mean by that is that you've effectively got people there who are very good at receiving central government instructions, looking at the list and then following through. And typically that's parceling out bits of money or implementing some sort of grant funding or whatever. But you know, I want to see councils that are properly funded so that they can act as vehicles for engagement and actually go out and talk to the people who are affected by these housing challenges. Because actually, you know, when you talk to people, they give you all the answers. So we're not short of answers. What we're short of is councils that are properly resourced to go and build proper local plans, not done from up here, but from the bottom up, and then deliver that stuff, not on a profit first basis, but on a how do we retain that value in the community with, you know, the government, the state, the council as the primary deliverer of those social houses.
Absolutely. I think we can take maybe two, 3 more questions. Yes, there in the middle.
Thank you. Just on land values, we've now got and it is land more than housing. 70% of the value of housing in Britain is actually the land it stands on, and in city areas it's probably 80 to 90%. And that then does pose questions about who owns the land, how we tax it, and so on. And one question that seems to have almost been dropped out of public memory is the 1961 Land Compensation Act, prior to which councils could compulsorily purchase land at their pre-development value, and now they have to pay it with the development, which can be, in some cases, 100 times higher. So that definitely needs to change, amongst many other things as well. Just on various things, I mean, Wales has abolished right to buy, and it has opened the way to council house building. My own council in Cardiff is now building 200 or 300 council homes every year, and I have to say they are of higher quality than what is being built in the private sector, and that's another important factor. But it's limited because Welsh Government, and hence down to the councils, has a Treasury imposed limit on how much it can borrow. And that then does, of course, lead directly into MMT. But even without an MMT perspective, these fiscal rules are mad when it comes to housing, because you're only looking at the deficit side of the balance sheet. Any sensible accountancy says you look at the asset as well, and you're building something that's going to be giving back rental income for the next 50 or 100 years. It really is completely irrational, and it's only explicable by the amount of financial investment that there now is in land in this country, and we really need to tackle that as a major thing. And in terms of wealth tax or anything else, you can't move land, so tax it.
We'll take a couple more.
So just a question, you earlier talked about the idea of how the councils don't have any money to do this and you'd like to be more properly funded. So have you considered using MMT, and I don't want to say weapon, but as a tool to have some of your allies go educate the councillors who can then go to the parliament and say, hey, give us the money locally here. And I don't know exactly, obviously, what the rules are here on getting central government funding, but that might be something to get the councillors to go speak on your behalf, and that might be a more powerful thing than you going in some ways.
And we'll take one more question in the room. Oh, yep, just here. Are there any more online, Gabby? Yeah, okay, we can take that one as well, if that's all right. All right, we'll do this one and then the online one.
As a sort of piece of anecdotal experience, a friend of mine was talking to a builder friend, and they were walking around in the estate, and they were looking at 3-bedroomed houses. And he said that the builder said, I could build that house for £40,000. And at that time, they were selling at £250,000, £260,000. And if you put that into the perspective of council housing, and council builders building a house, they could build approximately 4 houses for the price of the one private house that was being sold on the private market. So economically, it makes sense for the councils to build houses, because not only once they've invested in the house, they get an immediate return as soon as the tenant takes over. And I grew up, and I should be 80 at the end of this month, and the point about that is I grew up in the era when we had council housing, and my parents paid about 1/5 of their salary in council rents and rates. And the point about that is that it's in the interest of private house owners to see their house prices rise. And in effect, the reason that housing was cheap in those days when my parents were renting was the fact that the council house was a brake on the private housing sector. And so unless we go back to council housing built by direct labor forces, we're really, just supporting the current system. And if anything, it's got to end, like everything else that's going on these days.
Perhaps a final question from the online audience, from Deborah. Do you think a cultural change is necessary to make council housing back into general purpose housing rather than being seen as housing for the very poorest?
Okay, Simon, should we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, look, just repeating what I said earlier on the topic of land ownership, we have to have a grown-up conversation about how we bring that real resource back into public control, I think. So I agree. And then on the point about, MMT and education, I mean, that's why we're here, right? And that's why Stephen and Gabby are doing what they're doing. The more people who are equipped with this understanding of how public money works, then the more conversations we can have in councils up and down the land about how those councils should be adequately funded to do the things that need to be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree on the conversation around land. And yeah, glad you raised compulsory purchase orders. Councils should be able to do those much easier than currently. I think in Bristol, there's only been one that I've known about in the last 5 years, and they had to jump through so many hoops to make that happen. It should be much easier to do that for land that's not serving any purpose for the community. On the last question, yeah, I think we definitely culturally should be going back to seeing council housing as something that anyone could get access to. And I think the fact that council housing stock has become so poorly maintained is partially partially because it's seen as a way to avoid homelessness, right? So it's assumed that it's going to be low quality, and the expectation is just on the floor. So I think that is part of the problem. At the risk of suddenly becoming very unpopular in this room, I think it's important to have the right arguments and the right policy suggestions. It's not a waste of time to do that. But I don't think they're going to win us what we need. Like, I think we need the power. Like, our councillors are lobbying national government to try and get more funding. They're already doing that. And I don't think a better argument is going to get them any further. I think they need the power of community coming together and organising behind them to actually get that to happen. So for me, policy is good and important, but without the power behind it, we're never going to get there.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point to end on, but wait, I think we've got a little pitch for, yeah, go for it, Sam.
Yeah. So on that note, I found it really fascinating dipping into these conversations today. And I think, I'm going to go away and think about everything I've heard more. I put forward some policy positions that Acorn currently has. Those are decided democratically by our membership, so they will change over time. So if there's anything I've said that you disagree with, then you can join Acorn and put forward your positions, and those could become Acorn positions. Going back to this point about policy, obviously we need to think clearly about the world that we're trying to build, and we need to think clearly about the steps that are going to take us in that direction. But I do believe it's a waste of time just doing that if we're not also building community power to get us to that place. So those of you who want to get us to the place that we've been talking about, I strongly encourage you to join Acorn as a member. Membership means you get a vote, so you can vote locally, and you can also vote in national decision-making as well. And it's built like a trade union, so the main source of our funding is from dues from members. So members, if you're working full-time, chip in an hour's wage each month, so it's kind of based on your income. But it means that we don't have to be dependent on the funding of rich donors or political parties, so we can sustainably stay independent from them. All of the political parties and the billionaires can hate us, and they can remove all of their funding from us, and we will carry on. So yes, please join Acorn if you want to see the changes that we've talked about here.
Amazing.
Oh, yeah. And practically,
membership forms. You can do it right here.
Come later.
Or you can also do it online if you prefer. Thank you so much to our panelists. I found this extremely rich and fascinating. Great contributions. Big round of applause.